Iggy is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Don't at me.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today's show also brought to you by Hotels.com and Grip 6 Belts. We're going to be looking at the Portland Trail Blazers and their season review. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. A few particulars about this team. 53-29, third in the Western Conference. Obviously made it to the conference finals where they were blown out by the Warriors. Really strong for them to get over the Thunder. Didn't think they'd do that. Great for them to get over the Nuggets in 7 games. I also didn't think they would do that. Pretty predictable result, I guess, against the Warriors in that conference finals. I think it'll be hard for them to replicate what they did this season in the coming season. They were 18th in pace, 16th in defense, 3rd in offense, outperformed their expected win-loss by a couple of games as well. And then, of course, I think we all expected they outperformed what we thought they would do in the playoffs. Really, really strong for them to get to that area. No one's denying that at all, though. Really good performances from them to get that far. Let's look at their upcoming off-season. How that looks. They have pick number 25 in the draft, no second-round pick. Free agency decisions, the big one there is, of course, the Chief, Al-Farouq Aminu.
Sometimes may be good, sometimes may be shit.
He's an unrestricted free agent. There's Rocket Rodney Hood and Seth Curry, 2 rotation pieces who are also unrestricted free agents who are on really cheap contracts. They might be a little bit hard to re-sign. There's Enes Kanter, another key player who was the starting center in the playoffs, maybe the starting center at the beginning of next season as well if he re-signs, depending on Jusuf Nurkic's injury. So he's another key piece. And then restricted free agent Jake Layman, another part of the rotation, another guy they've got to make decisions on. So there is quite a bit here to decide on with this team. Aminu, Hood, Curry, Layman, Kanter. That's 5 rotation pieces. The injury to Nurkic, do guys like Zach Collins step up? Anthony Simons, can he take Seth Curry's role next year? Did we see anything from Gary Trent? They're in a bit of a limited spot. They don't have cap space to go and sign free agents because of those large contracts that McCollum and Lillard are on, but also Evan Turner, Myers Leonard, they're on decent deals. They don't have this space to go out and make big free agency impacts. It would have to be via trade if they're going to do anything. So bringing these guys back will be something that I think that they would be keen to do, but whether they're able to do it, that remains to be seen, given these guys, like especially Curry, I think is going to have a better offer out there, or an ability to get a better offer. Hood was traded during the season. He doesn't have bird rights, I believe, this season either. Kanter, again, just a guy picked off the scrap heap after the Knicks cut him, so there's no bird rights on him either. So getting these guys to return could be a little bit of a challenging situation for this Portland Trailblazers squad. Just a reminder, today's show, you make sure you never miss a show, and one of the best ways you can do that is by downloading the Himalaya podcast app. It's free, it's easy to use. They have personally curated playlists made just for you by their expert podcast tastemakers. You can follow all of your favorite shows and creators over on Himalaya. So download the Himalaya podcast app from the App Store or from Google Play, and don't forget to follow Locked On Fantasy Basketball when you're there. All right, let's talk about these players now. We've got Damian Lillard, the 12th ranked overall player in fantasy, almost 36 minutes a night, which is obviously really high. 26 points, 3 threes, 4.5 boards, 7 assists with 1 steal, 44 and 91, and that free throw percentage is Lillard's best fantasy contribution, 91% on over 6 attempts per game. His second best was his points, so really helping in those couple of categories. This is the guy he's sort of been most of the time, a back-end first, early-ish second-round guy. He was 9th last season, 12th this season, 17th and 18th the 2 years before that. His field goal percentage is rock solid. It's on 44 every single year. 90s in the free throws. Those free throw attempts are really key. He's never a high assist guy. He's not a high steals guy, although that was okay this year. He's a pretty decent enough rebounder, but not a strong one. We sort of know who Damian Lillard is at this point, about to turn 29 in a couple of months' time. The Blazers looking to give him a super max extension, which could end up being disastrous at the end of that contract, as pretty much all super max extensions are. But I think they're going to have to do that. By far, the leader on this team in PIPM, and actually not by far, but the leader on this team in PIPM and in wins added, and had the highest on-off marginally above Jusuf Nurkic as a plus 11.2. So obviously really key in what he does. You think he's going to be around this early second, late first type of range for the next 2 to 3 seasons. Just a really, really consistent performer. Played 80 games this season. Doesn't tend to get hurt that much. A really, really key performer and a great fantasy option where we know where he is. I'm just not sure if there's any further ceiling here for Damian Lillard to get better. The next guy we do talk about is Nurkic, who had a real breakout season before breaking his leg, pun unintended, the 32nd ranked player overall on the season, only 27 minutes a game, and he started off the season a little bit shaky, but ended with 15 and 6 with 10.5 boards, over 3 assists, a steal, 1.4 blocks, 51 and 77. Now, he shot 10% on his threes. If he's going to take threes, I'd like him to shoot them a little bit better. But this is by far the best season of Nurkic's career, right up there into that third round range. He did it by improving his free throws by a staggering amount, almost 14% improvement in his free throw numbers. We saw his assist numbers almost double from 1.8 to 3.2. He had extra rebounds, he scored more, and did that while his usage didn't change, mainly because of the free throws. The problem we have here is the broken leg, and when is he going to be back? Now, Nurkic is still really young. He's not even 25 yet. So while I think that Nurkic will miss a decent chunk of the beginning of next season, I think he'll be back at some point next season. Maybe around that January type of mark would be a decent guess, December, January. So he's not going to miss the entire season. And from what we understand, that there's no real nerve damage or muscle or ligament damage. So I don't think it's going to be a Gordon Hayward type scenario. It's more going to be a Paul George scenario. Whereas next year, he won't be the same guy. But at his really young age, he should be going into his age 26 season, which will be the 2021 season, fully healthy and still not quite in his prime. So it could be an opportunity if you're in a non-competing dynasty team to acquire Nurkic with the understanding that he won't be as good next season, but the ability to bounce back, I think, is pretty strong. He was massive for this team, second in PIPM, second in wins added, despite playing the fourth most amount of minutes, plus 11.1 on-off, really, really strong from Nurkic. And he showed some of these things that we'd all been hoping for. Could we see a sustained improvement in free throws? Will those assist numbers, which he flashed when he came across to Portland, would that stay consistent? And it ended up being that way. They ran a lot more through him. He was just more of a dominating presence, he was stronger, really, really strong defensively, and started to establish himself as a not quite an all-star caliber center, but a really bloody good player and a fantastic top 50 option moving forward for fantasy basketball. Next up, we look at CJ McCollum, who was quite disappointing overall this season. I think that's fair to say. He's 27 and a half years of age, played 70 games, 34 minutes, had that injury at the end of the season and came back and played really well in the playoffs, but his regular season wasn't quite there. 21 and 4 with 3 assists, 2.4 threes, and of course, just piss poor defensive numbers. 0.8 steals, 0.4 blocks, 46 and 82. He shot 38% from 3. This is a guy who was 54th last year, 28th the year before that. So why has he dropped off in terms of the numbers? Well, his shooting numbers have dropped off, where that 16-17 season, he was shooting 51% on twos. He's dropped down 47 last year, 49 this season. The three-pointers went from 42 down to 39, down to 38, so drop-offs there. And he just can't supplement it with those other numbers. The assist numbers also fell off with guys like Seth Curry around to handle the ball. They weren't having CJ exclusively run the backup point guard. He doesn't get steals. The usage dropped a little bit with more going towards Nurkic. He still struggles as a defender. Will CJ ever have a top 50 season again? I think that's a legitimate question to ask. He hasn't been top 50 each of the last 2 seasons. We're seeing some declines happen in his game. Not saying that he's really dropping off, but if he had another year as a 20-point per game scorer, averaging 21, 4, and 3, which is basically what he's done each of the last 2 seasons, that's not a surprise. To get from the 60th ranked guy back into the top 50, he needs to go from a 44, 45% shooter back up to that 1 year where he was a 48% shooter. And that might be a little bit hard to come by for CJ McCollum. Again, as I said, still a bit of a negative defensively. 4th on this team in wins added, which may be a bit of a surprise. Still was a positive on-off. No one's shocked with that, given the state of some of the players that were coming off the bench in his stead. But it was a little bit of a disappointment, especially considering he had a ridiculous, and it was ridiculous at the time, ADP of 31. Did not live up to that in the slightest. Let's talk about Enes Kanter now, the 101st ranked player overall. Most of that damage being done as a member of the New York Knicks. He's just turned 27, 24 and a half minutes, almost 14 points with 10 boards. Half a steal, half a block, 55 and 79. We know where the value is. It's in the percentages, it's in the rebounds, it's in the scoring, and it's in nothing else. Where does Kanter end up? Now, some of the, thoughts of Kanter being a guy that's unplayable in the playoffs went away at times. He had some strong games in the playoffs. The Warriors were always going to be a struggle for him. But he did step it up towards the end of the year. But which team, outside of the Blazers, if they can bring him back, wants Enes Kanter to come in and be a 27-minute-a-night guy? I'm not sure there's really anyone out there that wants that. Great as a second unit center, a guy that can come in and play 20, 21 minutes and still go for 10 and 9, sort of what he was doing before Nurkic got injured, which wasn't really a standard league type of a guy. Pushed into larger action when Nurk went down. There is, of course, Zach Collins there, who could push into a larger role as well. Will we see him start to take those minutes away from Kanter? I think all of that is realistic to expect, and I've got the feeling that he's not going to be really much in consideration as a standard league guy next season, but it's all dependent on where he goes. He was okay during his time in Portland, a negative 1.5 during the regular season, negative 0.9 on-off. They're okay numbers. He did step it up in the playoffs, and he was really, really key with Nurkic out, being able to produce performances to keep the Blazers advancing and continuing to advance. But we know who he is at this point, and I don't think we should be expecting really anything to change with Kanter as we move forward. The next guy we talk about is the Chief. It's Al-Farouq Aminu. One more time.
Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
He's the 137th ranked player overall, 28 minutes a game, 9.5 and 7.5. He hit a 3 a game, 0.8 steals, half a block, 43 and 87% from the line. Big change in that free throw, actually. 74 last year, up to 85. That's a big jump. And also, he'd been under 40% from the field each of the last 2 seasons and stepped that back up. But the player that Aminu is, this is a guy that, and I've talked about this on previous shows, that has a value as a late round guy, but there's no upside. So yeah, you could take him at pick 140 and he probably gives you the value back at pick 140. But there's no upside in that. An unrestricted free agent. He struggled a lot in the playoffs. Will they look to bring him back? He's not 29 yet, so there's still a few years in him, but I'm just not sure that I'm not sure. I know that there is really very limited upside here for fantasy for Aminu at all. He was strong in terms of on-off, a plus 8.8. That's really, really good. A plus 2.98 PIPM. Third on the team in wins added as well. Really, really strong stuff there. Some of that is to do with the players that he's playing within that starting 5, but we sort of know who Aminu is as a fantasy contributor. The other guy who I guess we've got some idea who he is flaming Mo Harkless, the 161st ranked player overall, 60 games and 24 minutes a game. Injuries again, the problem with Harkless limiting his playing time in the early portion of the season where he suffered that knee soreness and missed a chunk of games through November. Played most of the rest of the year, but can never sort of get those minutes back up to where they needed to be. This is a guy that 2 years ago was just on the cusp of the top 100, playing 29 minutes a game. You feel like his body and his offensive limitations are probably going to limit him from ever getting back to that, but he's one of those players who's a low-volume scorer, but a 1-1 contributor. 0.6 triples, 1.1 steals, 0.9 blocks, 49 and 67. The good shooting, which we'd seen each of the last couple of seasons, fell completely off, just 27% from 3 from Harkless. But again, he was still a positive. He's still a really good defender. Offense, there's a problem, but provided a positive PIPM, a positive on-off, and after him, there's no one else on this team that actually had any sort of positive on-off at all. That starting 5 was strong, and the bench, there was real issues there with that Portland bench. But Harkless, again, limited upside, much like Aminu. He could be in for a larger role if the Chief does end up leaving. I'd love to see them try Harkless permanently as a power forward, but the shooting can be a problem. He can hit them sort of at times, but it's just not consistent enough. He's never going to do anything playmaking-wise or really doing much to create his own shot either. Rocket Rodney Hood, the next guy we talk about, the 204th ranked player overall, struggled in Cleveland. Went to Portland, didn't do a huge amount, 11 points, had some pretty strong playoff games, no doubt about that, against Denver, 11 points per game, 1-3, 0.8 steals, 44 and 88. This is a guy I've been high on for a while, but I'm losing a lot of confidence that anything's really ever going to develop. Low rebound, low assist, low steal, low block numbers from Hood, inefficient scoring-wise, had 55% true shooting this year, has never had a season above league average in true shooting. He can score without really doing anything else. I don't think any team's going to be falling all over themselves to bring Hood in to be a key 28 to 30 minute a night piece of their team. He was a negative 2.07 PIPM on this squad. He was a negative 1.1 on off. It didn't really do enough to get me excited about really much for his future. Now, he's still decently young, 26 and a half at the moment, will be 27 at some point next season. I just don't see that upside for Hood, and that's going to be the case for a lot of these guys we talk about on this Trailblazers bench. Just a quick reminder, today's show also brought to you by Hotels.com. Make sure you don't hate like your friend's trip. Book your own with Hotels.com. Hotels.com, be there, do that, get rewarded. And also brought to you by Grip 6. Ultra lightweight, no holes, no flap. It's a great Father's Day gift. Go to Grip 6 for your special offer. Grip6.com/lock, LOCKE. Let's talk Evan Turner now, the 250th ranked player, just another guy that this is just who he is. 31 years of age, 22 minutes, 7, 4.5, and 4 with 0.5 steals, 46 and 71. Now, he occasionally steps up and had that, I think, back-to-back triple-doubles at the end of the season, and he can be a really strong assists streamer. A guy getting 4 assists per game is always someone you've got to have your eye on if you're looking to influence that assist category at the end of the week in a head-to-head matchup. But apart from that, his lack of shooting, 21% on threes, is abysmal. Offensively, he's just not going to be taking shots and scoring much. He's a strong rebounder and assist guy. And that's really about it for Evan Turner as to what he can contribute. 5th highest on this team in minutes, but a pretty disappointing negative 2.6 PIPM, negative 4.6 on off. These are not strong numbers by any stretch of the imagination. And it's still one more year on that contract. They would love to be able to get off that, and it now becomes an expiring deal, so maybe he finds himself on another team. I just don't see a scenario where Evan Turner's providing significantly more value than what we saw this year. A guy that I can see is Zach Collins, who started out the season really, really red hot, cooled off a bit. 252nd ranked player overall in just under 18 minutes, 6.5 points with 4 boards, 0.9 blocks, 0.5 threes, 47 and 75 with 33% shooting from 3. Now, we recall how he started off the season, 6 blocks in the season opener, 11 and 5 after that, 7 and 5, 17 and 6, 13 and 4, 17 and 3. And he was playing minutes over Nurkic. And we thought, oh, here we go. When is this going to happen? When's this switch going to happen? It felt imminent. And then he started to drop off. A lot of those numbers that he was providing, there was unsustainability, and I talked about that at the time. The block numbers, the insanely high field goal percentage. But I still really like what Collins does. I think that there is a massive possibility, and it probably should be the case, that he enters next season as their starting center as Nurkic recuperates. Even if they do bring back Kanter, I just like to see them try and develop Collins heading into his 3rd season in that role. Offensively, though, the advanced stuff really doesn't like him. Negative 2.85 PIPM. The on-off really hated him as well. Negative 7 overall. So there are some red flags there in terms of his production, but I do believe in him as a fantasy prospect. He's a blocks and threes type of guy who can be efficient from the field and the line. He can be a strong rebounder, and I think he can improve his scoring, and I don't think the passing is a complete write-off. I think there's room for him to be a top 100, top 70 guy in a couple of years' time, and he's going to have that opportunity, I believe, this season, at least at the start of the year, to start to cement himself as a decent enough player. He played some minutes at the 4 as well, alongside Kanter and Nurkic. There are still some concerns, but in terms of upside players on this team, this is really where the list begins and where it ends. Seth Curry, really strong after sitting out all of last season with that leg injury. 19 minutes, 8 points, 1.5 threes on 45% shooting. I always feel like he needs a bigger role. He deserves a bigger role. Never seems to come. A 0.9 assist is pretty poor, obviously, but that shooting is very important from Seth. If he could find 28 minutes a night, he'd be on the door of a 12-team league. Finding that is probably going to be the challenge for Seth. Overall, defensively, he can struggle a bit, although he guarded He guarded his brother pretty well in the playoffs, but overall a negative 2.58 PIPM is not encouraging. Negative 3 on-off has its issues, but so much of that is to do with the discrepancy between the Blazers starters and the Blazers bench as well. But he is someone absolutely to watch in free agency. Could find himself in a larger role, who starts to be able to perform at a higher level and get those more minutes and contribute 2.5 threes a game. Maybe he gets you 3 assists, although that's looking a little bit dicey with the way that he is currently playing. But it was an impressive bounce-back season from Seth Curry. I also thought Myers Leonard turned in a better performance than what we've seen from him in the past. There were moments when he was getting minutes, regular rotation minutes, played 61 games, 14 minutes, 6-4 on 55 and 84% shooting, but just nothing in assists, no steals, no blocks, on a completely bloated contract, really poor defensively, bad PIPM, horrible on-off, negative 9.4. There were lots of struggles with not Stauskas. He's the next guy we'll talk about soon. Really, a lot of struggles with. Actually, we're not going to talk Stauskas. Really, a lot of struggles with Leonard this season, and I don't really see any sort of steps forward. That's really the genesis, or not the genesis, the whole synopsis of this Portland team. Is that where is the upside in any of these guys outside of Zach Collins? It is a real concern as to where do these guys get better. It's got to come from Anthony Simons, I think, who just turned 20, only played 20 games, 7 minutes a game. We just didn't get to see him much at all. Barely played in the G League. 4 points with 0.7 assists, half a three, shot 35% from 3. That's all well and good in those limited sample sizes, and we love what we saw from him in the season finale. Played all 48 minutes, had 37, 6, and 9 with 7 assists. Of course, shot 62%, and not a number that's likely to stick at any sort of situation. But it was enough to make me think, well, if Seth leaves, if Rocket Rodney leaves, then Simons could step into that role. I've got significantly more hope for him than Gary Trent Jr. He showed more this season. I had more hope for him coming in to the league. He can get assists, he can score, he can hit threes, he can rebound a little bit as well. So there is some upside for Simons, and we could start to see it develop more next season. There is that opportunity, as I mentioned, with both Seth and Hood potentially being gone, that he could step into that larger role, but not quite ready for any sort of primetime role or anything along those lines. But he is a guy I think they should be having a decent amount of hope or a little bit of excitement for, in a team where, for as good as they are, in terms of young guys coming through, there's not much there. And the last guy we talk about is Gary Trent. Only 15 games for him, 7.5 minutes, 2.7 points, 32% from the field, 24% from 3. Didn't do anything really to wow us at all. Limited time in the G League, and he played a handful of games there as well. That's the way the Blazers do it. They don't send anybody down to the G League, so we just don't get game time with these players. I think that Trent is just more of a shooter and scorer and doesn't contribute in those other categories, whereas I think that Simons can provide value in some of those other areas, unlike Trent. So he's the guy out of that group that I'd be more interested in. That'll wrap it up for the Blazers. Not huge amounts to talk about for these guys from a fantasy point of view, but make sure you are subscribing to this show and whatever your favorite show is across the Locked On Podcast Network by downloading the Himalaya Podcast app. You can also find us Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and on Spotify. Subscribe on YouTube, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell so you never miss an episode, and subscribe to the Locked On Podcast, or follow the Locked On Podcast Network on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On NBA Net. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Evan Turner.